Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Andrew Keene fled city chaos for peaceful country life, he never expected a war with a homeowners association he didn't even belong to. But when a secret land grab threatens his home, one man stands his ground, armed with truth, grit, and a very angry squirrel. I never thought peace and quiet could be so damn political. When I bought this old farmhouse on the edge of town, I had no idea I'd be stepping into a war zone disguised as suburbia. My name's Andrew Keene. I'm 42, an architect by trade, ex-city guy by exhaustion. After 15 years of gridlock traffic, office drama, and back-to-back deadlines, I said screw it, sold my overpriced downtown condo, and bought 3 acres of what I thought was solitude. The property was a beauty. A weathered Victorian fixer-upper sitting on the edge of a wooded ridge, just outside a planned residential development called Clearwater Bluffs. You know the type. Identical beige houses, matching mailboxes, and HOA newsletters full of words like compliance and community harmony. But the best part, my land wasn't part of it. That detail was extremely important to me. My realtor made that crystal clear. I wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. I could plant a flamingo army on my lawn if I wanted. Freedom. The house needed work, and I liked that. I spent the first few weeks clearing out dead brush, replacing the roof shingles, fixing the porch steps, and setting up my home office in the upstairs sunroom. It was quiet, peaceful, and mine. The first few neighbors I met were cordial enough. A retired couple brought me muffins. A dog walker waved from a distance. And then there was Todd Shepard, khaki shorts, tucked-in polo, HOA board member, and proud owner of a truck so clean it probably hadn't hauled anything in its life. He came over on day 4 of my moving in. Didn't knock, just hovered at the edge of the gravel drive with his arms crossed like he was inspecting an eyesore. "Hey there," he called out, squinting at my house like it offended him. "Welcome to Clearwater." I smiled politely. "Thanks, but technically, I'm just next to Clearwater." He chuckled, but it was the kind of chuckle people make when they're not actually amused. "Well, you're close enough. We like to keep the whole area looking uniform. Makes everyone's property more valuable, you know?" I bit back my initial reply and settled for a nod. He lingered a bit too long, asked questions about my renovation plans, commented that my paint color was a bit dark, and hinted that some coordination with the HOA board could be helpful. I reminded him again that I wasn't under HOA rules. His smile tightened. That was the first encounter. A couple weeks later, I was drinking coffee on the porch when I heard the growl of engines. Heavy ones. I walked around the side of the house to find a construction crew, truck, skid steer, and a cement mixer, unloading equipment right near the tree line at the far edge of my property. At first, I thought they were clearing a neighbor's lot, until I saw the pink flag stakes on my side. I marched over, still in my bathrobe and slippers, and asked the foreman what the hell they were doing. "Driveway extension," he said, flipping through his clipboard like it was all routine. "Connecting the end of Maple Shade Lane to the Eastern Fire Access Path. HOA approved." I blinked. "You're on my land." He paused, glanced at the clipboard again, then looked back at me. "Says here, this area's part of a designated easement, according to this expert report." He handed me a paper. It looked official, seal, signatures, even a county header, but something felt off. The parcel ID was slightly wrong. The survey lines looked suspiciously skewed. And the name of the so-called expert. Never heard of him. No company letterhead, just consulting partner Thomas King, which could just as easily be someone's fantasy football team name. I told them to stop. The foreman shrugged, said I'd need to take it up with the HOA, and started waving guys into position. Within the hour, they had started digging, right through my fence line and into a section of my yard where I had just planted native grasses and laid irrigation tubing. I stormed back inside, pulled every document I had, deed, parcel map, the title abstract, and the lawyer's letter verifying I was not, and never had been, under Clearwater Bluffs HOA. I called the county assessor's office and emailed my land surveyor, but I already knew what had happened. Someone had fudged the lines. By dusk, they had poured gravel, the first layer. I watched them from my window like it was an invasion, which, frankly, it was. A concrete invasion of the passive-aggressive suburban variety. Later that evening, I drove over to the Clearwater Bluffs HOA office, which, hilariously, is housed in a converted garage with a flag out front and a laminated mission statement taped to the door. It was after hours, but Todd was still inside, sipping something from a stainless steel thermos and typing away like a man who took himself very, very seriously. I didn't bother knocking. The door was open. "Hey, Todd," I said, stepping in. "You forgot to ask me before bulldozing my land." He looked up, feigned surprise. "Andrew, good evening. I take it you saw the work crew." I stared at him. "You built a road through my property." "Well," he said, leaning back in his ergonomic chair like he was settling in for a TED Talk. "Technically, the committee approved a connection path between Mapleshade and the future community lots. There's an easement right-of-way dating back to a 2004 zoning revision." "No," I snapped, "there's not. I checked every record when I bought this place. No easement, no right-of-way, no HOA jurisdiction. You're trespassing." Todd opened a drawer, pulled out a glossy folder, and slid it across the desk. Inside was a version of my parcel map, but the boundaries were off. Shifted just enough to make the access point fall on community land. "This map's a forgery," I said. He smiled. "It's from a certified consultant." "Then your consultant's a liar." "Well," Todd said, standing now, thermos in hand, "if you have an issue, I suggest you file a formal complaint. But construction resumes at 7 a.m. I left before I threw something. Back home, I sat on the porch and stared at the half-formed gravel scar cutting across my land. I knew this wasn't over, not even close. By the time the sun came up the next morning, I'd already been on the phone with my attorney twice, filed an urgent request for a formal property boundary verification, and emailed the county zoning department so many times I probably triggered a spam filter. I didn't sleep. I couldn't, not with the sound of gravel trucks gearing up to pour concrete 15 feet into my damn yard. At 7 sharp, they were back. I was waiting. I'd staked bright red flags all along the actual edge of my property, every single one of them backed by GPS coordinates, my title deed, and 2 printed maps, one from the assessor's office, one from my private land surveyor. I even laminated them and nailed them to posts, just in case someone decided ignorance was a valid excuse. The construction crew didn't even glance at them. They just rolled in, poured another bed of gravel, and started prepping the rebar. I stepped into their path like I was in Tiananmen Square, arms crossed, heart thudding. "You are trespassing," I said calmly, "on private land. Stop the work." The foreman gave me a tight smile and pulled out that same damn expert report again, waving it like a golden ticket. "We're following the HOA's directive. Talk to them." I nearly laughed. Instead, I called the sheriff. 20 minutes later, a cruiser rolled up. The deputy was a soft-spoken guy named Brewer. Looked like he'd rather be doing anything else, but at least he listened. I showed him the documents, the flagged border, and the obviously false map being used by the crew. Then I pointed at the pour line now reaching past the midway point into my land. "I want them off my property. Now." Brewer walked over to the foreman, had a quiet conversation, then came back with that trademark rural shrug. "This looks like a civil matter. You'll need to get a court order." They didn't stop. That afternoon, I drove down to the county office in person and spent 2 hours waiting for a land records clerk named Donna, who looked like she hadn't had a day off since Nixon resigned. I explained the situation, she pulled up the parcel history, and guess what? There was no recorded easement, nothing from 2004, nothing from any zoning meeting, no mention of shared access, public right-of-way, or community infrastructure. Then how the hell did they get a work permit? I asked. Donna shrugged. HOA permits are private. As long as they don't submit for city funding, it doesn't go through us. Unbelievable. I left with certified copies of my deed and property map in hand, stopped by my lawyer's office, and by sunset we had filed for an emergency injunction to halt construction. But court moves like molasses, and I knew damn well Todd wouldn't pause a thing unless someone in uniform made him. That night, I sat on the porch with a beer in one hand and a pair of binoculars in the other, watching headlights flicker down the gravel scar across my land. Not just workers, residents, a white SUV, a sedan, even a UPS truck. They were already using the unfinished drive as a shortcut. The next morning, it got worse. HOA sent me a letter. Not certified, not legal, just printed on heavy cardstock with a little watermark of a dove or something equally smug. It stated that I was in violation of community development plans, that my refusal to cooperate with the shared infrastructure project was obstructive, and that continued interference could result in financial consequences under HOA community code. There was a problem with that. I wasn't in the HOA. I grabbed the letter, marched to the HOA office/garage, and slammed it on Todd's desk. He didn't flinch. "This is harassment," I said. "You're creating unnecessary obstacles to a community improvement project," he replied, calm as can be. "I don't belong to your damn community." He nodded, almost like he pitied me. That's the attitude that holds neighborhoods back. I left before I screamed. Back home, I found my mailbox open and stuffed with flyers. Not just ads, statements, allegations. One read, "New resident disrupting community access. Road vital for emergency vehicles." Another, "Our children's safety depends on through access." Why is one man blocking it? There was even a printed petition with fake signatures at the bottom. I recognized at least 3 names from headstones in the nearby cemetery. This wasn't miscommunication anymore. It was war. And it got dirtier. 2 days later, I found one of my sprinklers broken, tire tracks across my flower bed, and a dead squirrel zip-tied to my fence post with a note, "You're not welcome here." That's when I realized Todd was doing more than trying to build a road. He was building pressure. I woke up on a Thursday morning to the sound of jackhammering. For a split second, I thought I was dreaming. Then I saw the cloud of concrete dust drifting past my bedroom window. I threw on jeans, grabbed a hoodie, and stormed outside barefoot. They were pouring concrete on my land. Rebar had already been laid the previous day while I was out meeting with the county's zoning enforcement officer who, shocker, claimed it was not within their jurisdiction. Now the crew was smoothing fresh concrete like they were icing a goddamn cake. The driveway was now not just a line in the gravel, it was permanent, gray, wide, and unapologetic. The foreman gave me a look that was one part pity, one part not my problem. I didn't say a word. I just turned around, went back inside, and poured myself a scalding hot mug of black coffee, the kind that peels the inside of your mouth. Then I did what I should have done days ago. I retaliated. 3 hours later, a flatbed truck rumbled down my private road, loaded with 7 enormous precast concrete blocks, the kind used to close off highways. I'd rented them from a construction company 3 towns over. I tipped the driver in cash to back them directly into the middle of the newly poured road on my side of the property line. 6 blocks went across in a clean row, just inside my border, angled enough to make turning impossible. The 7th stood upright like a tombstone with a giant hand-painted sign, "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted under state law." For good measure, I wrapped the whole thing in neon yellow caution tape like a crime scene. About an hour later, the show began. A silver sedan pulled up and tried to turn through the new road, hit the blockade, reversed, then drove off. A neighbor with a golf cart stopped and yelled something I couldn't hear. By dusk, 3 people had knocked on my door. I ignored them. I was busy editing security footage and preparing time-stamped photos for my lawyer. The next morning, it started again. This time, Todd showed up. He didn't knock. Just stood in my driveway like a chaperone waiting to scold a kid after school. When I opened the door, he had a clipboard in one hand and a phone in the other. "We need to have a conversation," he said. "We don't. You've created a traffic hazard. Emergency vehicles can go around like they always have. This was never a through road, Todd. You made that up." He actually had the gall to sigh, like I was being difficult. "I'm asking you, as a representative of the HOA, to remove the obstruction." I sipped my coffee. "And I'm telling you, as the legal owner of this land, to get the hell off my property." He left with a smirk. 3 hours later, I received an email from the HOA board titled Violation Notice. Apparently, my newly placed blocks on my own land were now considered a community safety concern, and I was being fined $15,000. That's when I laughed, out loud, standing alone in my living room like a lunatic. $15,000 for blocking access to a driveway they built illegally across my yard. I drafted a response. 3 lines. "I am not a member of your HOA. I am not subject to your bylaws. Cease further contact, or I will file harassment charges. Send." But Todd wasn't done. That night, I was woken up at 3 in the morning by a loud crack. I bolted outside with a flashlight and found the frontmost concrete block, the one with the sign, shattered. Someone had hit it with something heavy, probably a sledgehammer. My trail camera mounted nearby had caught the whole thing. 2 figures in hoodies, one of them tall, swinging hard while the other kept watch. I couldn't see faces, but one of them had the exact same work boots I'd seen Todd's son wearing the week before. I filed a police report, handed over the footage, and replaced the block the next day with a bigger one. This time, I bolted it into the ground with anchor rods, and I added motion sensor floodlights. Todd didn't show up again that week, but the HOA email campaign picked up. Flyers started reappearing, anonymous notes in my mailbox, passive-aggressive posts on Nextdoor. A fake petition circulated with my name listed as a combative outsider threatening community safety. I printed it, framed it, and hung it in my bathroom. Then I got smart. I filed for a temporary restraining order, a TRO, to block any further construction on or near my land, citing vandalism, harassment, and property violation. My lawyer helped push it through, and by Monday, we had a preliminary hearing date. Meanwhile, I decided it was time for a little public education. Saturday morning, I set up folding chairs and invited a few neutral neighbors over for coffee and a property line picnic. We had bagels, maps, and laminated copies of my deed. I pointed out where the real line was. A few people nodded. One guy admitted he thought I was just being dramatic, but changed his mind after seeing the evidence. The tide was starting to shift, but I knew better than to get comfortable. Concrete sets fast. But grudges, especially HOA grudges, set even faster. The restraining order did its job for about 48 hours. Then the real games began. It started with silence, an eerie, deliberate kind of silence. No workers, no concrete trucks, no HOA letters, just birds, wind, and the occasional distant mower. At first, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally backed off. That maybe the concrete blocks and the court filing had made it clear I wasn't some pushover retiree they could steamroll. But then I noticed something strange. The road they'd already poured, it was being used. Not officially, of course, but early in the morning and late at night, I started seeing cars creeping through, slowly, cautiously, like they were testing the waters. Neighbors cutting through my property like it was some kind of shortcut. Delivery trucks started using it too. FedEx, Amazon, even a landscaping crew that clipped the edge of my flower bed backing out. This wasn't over. This was tactical retreat. They were letting the road speak for itself, normalizing it, pretending it had always been there, a fact on the ground. I documented everything. Videos, time-stamped photos, car models, plate numbers. I even started a spreadsheet, but it wasn't until Tuesday that the next bomb dropped. I got a call from my attorney, Max, short and to the point. Check your email. You're gonna love this. There it was. An internal HOA document forwarded anonymously, marked confidential in Comic Sans, because of course it was, laying out a strategic infrastructure initiative. Buried halfway down the page was this gem: projected property value increase of up to 22% for interior lots following successful access connection via eastern boundary. Priority: fast-track completion and neutralize resistance from external property owner, Keen. Neutralize. That was the word they used. Like I was a tumor, not a human. I knew who sent the email. Cynthia. I'd met her a week earlier during the property line picnic. She was quiet, sharp-eyed, and introduced herself as the board treasurer. Turns out she wasn't just bored, she was furious. She called me later that day. "I can't stand what they're doing," she said. "They're using HOA funds to finance access to private land they plan to flip." Flip? Yeah, she said. Todd and Brian, the vice chair, set up a shell company, Green Path LLC. It's not under HOA records, but I traced the business registration. Brian's cousin is the listed agent, but it's them. They bought 3 undeveloped lots just beyond your east border, cheap, because they had no road access. I sat there, stunned. "They're using HOA money to pave a road," I said slowly, "so they can increase the value of their own lots, and they're trying to run that road through my land." "Exactly," she said. "They plan to sell them as ready-to-build lots with existing access." I could have vomited. This wasn't just entitlement or HOA power tripping. This was fraud. A coordinated scheme to steal value using fabricated documents, HOA funds, and my damn backyard. Cynthia sent me copies of internal emails. One from Todd read, "Once the drive is in and usage becomes routine, legal opposition becomes more expensive than compliance. Translation: screw the law, normalize the abuse." I added the emails to my legal folder and filed a second complaint, this time citing fraudulent misrepresentation and conspiracy to misappropriate HOA funds. Then I called a buddy of mine, Sean, a journalist for a regional paper who owed me a favor after I redesigned his garage into a guest house for half the price. I pitched the story. He said, "That's insane. You have proof?" I sent him everything. 2 days later, a story ran online. Private property public theft. HOA faces accusations of fraud, land grab. The title was a bit dramatic, but so was the situation. The response was immediate. That afternoon, 3 different residents from Clearwater Bluffs knocked on my door. All said the same thing in different tones. "We had no idea. This isn't right." They weren't my enemies. Not really. Just misled. Most of them had no clue their dues were being used to grease the wheels of Todd's backdoor real estate scheme. I started holding informal property truth sessions on my lawn. Nothing fancy, just a cooler of lemonade, some folding chairs, and a stack of documents. People came, not a lot at first, but enough. Word got out. Neighbors started asking questions. Real questions. That's when Todd came back. He showed up during one of those sessions, red-faced, huffing like a bloodhound in a sauna. Didn't even look at me. Just walked straight into the group and said, "You are not authorized to hold meetings on behalf of the HOA." I stood up. "Correct," I said. "I'm holding meetings on behalf of myself, the guy whose land you stole." He waved a folder at me. "These accusations are baseless, slanderous." "Then sue me," I said. "Please. I'd love to see you try to explain Greenpath LLC in court." He froze, then turned and walked away, faster than he arrived. But he wasn't done. That night, I got another anonymous message. No name, just a burner email. It had 2 attachments. One was a digital map, an altered survey. Same as before, my property lines shifted just enough to make the road look legal. The second was a scanned letter addressed to the zoning board dated 2 months earlier, signed by someone named Thomas King, the same fake consultant from the expert report. But here's the kicker. Thomas King had died in 2017. I always thought the phrase, "the walls are closing in," was just dramatic metaphor, until I found myself sitting across from my lawyer, Max, staring at a stack of legal papers with my name printed in bold letters under the words, "Counterclaim for damages, HOA versus Andrew Keene." 15 pages of absolute fiction. The HOA was now suing me, claiming I had willfully destroyed public infrastructure, caused obstruction of emergency routes, and created hostile conditions for community development. They even included an affidavit from a fire department official claiming the concrete blocks I installed could delay emergency response time. Except the fire department doesn't use that route, because it's not a real road, because it's my land. Max skimmed through the pages with that classic defense attorney calm, the kind that says, "This is stupid, but we still have to go through it." He finally set them down and said, "They're trying to flip the script, paint you as the aggressor, classic PR move. It won't hold up, but it'll stall things. And buy them time. Time for what? Whatever their endgame is," he muttered. We filed an official response within 24 hours, refuting every point with documentation, photos, zoning records, GPS-tagged surveys, and the emails Cynthia had leaked. Max also filed a motion to compel financial disclosure from the HOA, every invoice, payment, and contract related to the construction of the road and the use of HOA funds. That got their attention. Todd went quiet. Brian disappeared from the board meetings entirely. Meanwhile, Cynthia fed me updates from the inside. Turns out they'd used a shell contractor called Clearview Infrastructure Solutions, a company with no real address, no website, and a business license that had been revoked in 2 other states. Guess who signed the contract? Brian's wife. The whole thing reeked like a dead raccoon behind drywall. I started preparing for the court hearing like I was prepping for a war. I built a timeline wall in my office, complete with string, pins, printouts, and sticky notes. It looked like the set of a crime docuseries. Every time someone came over, I had to explain I wasn't losing my mind. I was just fighting an HOA. Max set the hearing date for the following week, and the judge approved my request to present digital evidence, including the video footage of trespassing, the forged expert letter signed by a dead man, and financial links between HOA funds and Greenpath LLC. Then came the cherry on top, a surprise visit from 2 county auditors. Apparently, the article Sean had written triggered a quiet inquiry at the county finance office. Not because of me, but because HOA funds are partially tax deductible if they're used for infrastructure. If fraud was involved, it wasn't just civil anymore. One of the auditors, a woman with the personality of a tax form, walked the entire road with me, GPS tracker in hand, muttering to herself and snapping photos. "This is bad," she said at one point. "This road cuts across 3 separate parcels not owned by the HOA. She paused. "And 2 of them are yours." Damn right. They left with a folder full of my documents and said I'd be contacted if any criminal charges were pursued. I wasn't holding my breath, but it felt good to watch the walls creak. That weekend, I started getting strange phone calls, unlisted numbers, hang-ups. Once, a voice just said, "Back off," and hung up. I logged everything, sent it to Max. Then I took a page from Todd's playbook. If they wanted to weaponize image and perception, fine. So would I. I hired a videographer, a real one. Wedding videographer turned documentary shooter. I walked him through the entire property step by step, showed him the boundary flags, the illegal road, the cement blocks, the site where the original survey was faked. Then I sat on my porch with my dog in my lap and told the whole story. We posted the video online. Within 48 hours, it had over 60,000 views. Comments ranged from classic HOA BS to burn the whole system down. People shared their own horror stories. Lawyers chimed in. A land rights nonprofit contacted me asking if they could use my footage in an awareness campaign, but not everyone was cheering. That Monday, someone dumped a load of mulch across my driveway at 2 in the morning. Not a little mulch, a truckload, blocking the entire entrance. The cameras caught a truck with a magnetic decal that had been peeled off halfway. I couldn't see a plate. I called the sheriff. Again. He sighed, took the report, and said what I already knew. It's likely related. But without a plate, not much we can do. Max called later and said, "They're spiraling. That means you're winning." But I didn't feel like I was winning. I felt like I was bleeding out, one court motion at a time. Then, finally, the day came. Courtroom, county seat. A single judge who looked like he'd rather be golfing, a handful of reporters in the back row, and a packed gallery of Clearwater Bluffs residents. Some curious, some furious, some just bored retirees looking for drama. Todd showed up in a charcoal suit and fake humility. I wore boots, jeans, and a button-up. Property owner chic. The hearing began. I raised my hand, and I was ready to blow it all wide open. I don't remember the judge's name. I remember the color of his tie, mustard yellow, and the fact that he sighed a lot. That seemed to be his thing, but I wasn't there for the theatrics. I was there to put Todd and his merry band of suburban pirates exactly where they belonged, under oath, under pressure, and under legal scrutiny. Max opened with facts, clear, cold, undeniable. He walked the court through the parcel deed, the title abstract, the boundary survey, all notarized, all time-stamped, all ironclad. Then came the aerial drone footage of the poured road slicing through my property like a scar. The judge barely glanced up. But when Max introduced Exhibit F, the expert report signed by Thomas King, things shifted. Max handed a printed obituary to the bench. "Your Honor," he said, "Thomas King passed away in 2017. The signature on this document is dated 3 months ago." Finally, the judge looked interested. Todd's lawyer, a weasel-faced man in a suit 2 sizes too tight, objected, muttering about inadmissible character evidence, but it didn't stick. The judge told him to sit down and turned to Todd. "Mr. Shepard, can you explain how a deceased consultant signed off on a property assessment for your project?" Todd blinked like someone had thrown cold water in his face. He stammered, said something about clerical errors and outsourced document prep, then blamed Brian, who, notably, was not present in court. Max kept the pressure on. Emails, financials, HOA meeting minutes, all the puzzle pieces Cynthia had risked her reputation to smuggle out. Every payment for the road traced back to the HOA fund, and from there to Clearview Infrastructure Solutions, the shell company owned by Brian's wife. Then came Greenpath LLC. Max displayed the incorporation documents, real estate filings, and public registry screenshots. Owners, Brian's cousin on paper, but bank transfers told a different story. The money trail led straight to accounts tied to Todd. The judge leaned back, lips tight. "This is a civil hearing," he reminded us, "but I'm strongly recommending that the county district attorney review these records for criminal misconduct." Todd's lawyer looked like he wanted to melt through the floor. Then it was my turn. I walked up, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth, which honestly was a pleasure at this point. Max asked a few questions. I answered simply, factually. I described the construction, the threats, the vandalism. I explained the mulch, the broken sprinkler system, the shattered concrete block at 3 a.m. I even threw in the dead squirrel because why the hell not? And then Max said, Andrew, what was the impact of all this on your life? I paused, not because I didn't know, but because I did. I looked at the judge, at the crowd, at Todd. It's not just about land, I said. It's about being told that your rights don't matter. That if you're quiet and polite and do everything legally, someone bigger can still roll in and pave right over you. Literally. The judge nodded. A few people in the gallery did too. Then Todd was called to the stand. It was beautiful. He tried to sound confident, that slow HOA cadence, the we're just doing what's best for the community shtick. But under cross-examination, he folded like cheap patio furniture. Max hit him with one question after another. Did you disclose your ownership interest in Green Path to the HOA board? Why was the survey signed by a dead man? Why did Clearview bill the HOA for materials before the project was even? Approved. Todd tried to deflect, deny, reframe. But the paper trail didn't care. It just sat there, heavy and undeniable, like a wet bag of cement in the middle of the courtroom. By the time Todd stepped down, he looked 10 pounds lighter and 1,000 pounds defeated. The judge recessed for 30 minutes. I waited outside on a bench while a local news van set up across the street. One of the reporters recognized me and asked for a comment. I gave them a soundbite I'd been saving for weeks. You can't build your future on someone else's land and expect them not to fight back. Back in the courtroom, the judge read his ruling. First, he issued an immediate injunction. All use of the illegally constructed road was to cease immediately. The HOA was ordered to demolish the paved section and restore my property to its previous condition. Then came damages, $140,000, payable jointly by the HOA, Clearview, and Green Path LLC. And finally, the cherry on top, he referred the entire matter to the county district attorney for further investigation of potential fraud, forgery, and misuse of community funds. Todd didn't say a word. He just stared straight ahead like the cement he poured had hardened in his soul. I walked out of that courtroom a free man. But the fallout, that was just beginning. I thought watching them pour concrete across my land was the most satisfying thing I'd ever reverse engineer into karma. Turns out, watching them tear it up was even better. It started the week after the ruling. A new crew showed up, not the smug contractors from before. These guys didn't talk much. They just showed up with jackhammers, backhoes, and 2 dump trucks with rental plates. No HOA logo, no community improvement banners. Just men in hard hats doing their job, cutting the road apart inch by inch like they were extracting a tumor from the earth. Todd didn't supervise this time. He wasn't even seen. Rumor was he'd resigned from the board pending further investigation. No press release, no farewell statement, just vanished like a roach when the lights came on. The road came up in slabs. It took 3 days to remove every inch of poured concrete. On day 2, I brought out a folding chair, a 6-pack, and sat by the tree line with my dog to watch it happen. A few neighbors walked by. Some waved, some nodded awkwardly. One of them, a guy named Peter, came over and said, "I didn't believe you. I thought you were just being difficult." I looked at the gaping muddy scar that used to be the illegal road. Most people did, I said. That night, Clearwater Bluffs held an emergency HOA board meeting. It wasn't in the garage this time. They rented out the library conference room downtown, probably to avoid further embarrassment. I didn't attend, not officially, but a resident live-streamed the whole thing on Facebook. It was chaos. Cynthia stood up and read aloud the financial audit summary she'd personally compiled. $87,000 of HOA dues had been misappropriated under the pretense of infrastructure improvement. She displayed canceled checks, matching, timestamps, emails. Every lie was now evidence. Several residents demanded refunds. One woman asked flatly, "Why aren't we calling the police?" Brian, who had finally slithered into the room with a forced smile, claimed it was all a misunderstanding. He was booed. Loudly, someone threw a reusable water bottle. Within a week, a special election was announced. HOA leadership would be replaced. And Cynthia, She was running unopposed. Meanwhile, I got my own little slice of victory delivered in an envelope. A court-ordered check for $140,000. Actual paper, no fanfare, just legal restitution in a font I'd stared at for months. I took part of the money and hired a landscaping company to regrade the torn-up section of my land. I didn't want it restored. I wanted it better. We planted native trees along the old road path, added a stone walking path, some wildflowers, and a bench overlooking the woods. Where they saw a shortcut, I built a sanctuary. I also added one more item to the yard, a handmade wooden sign mounted on 2 steel poles right where the illegal road used to cut through. Private land. Not for sale, not for stealing. People smiled when they passed it. One guy left a 6-pack of beer on my porch with a sticky note that read, "For keeping the bastards honest." But it wasn't all fan mail. A few die-hard HOA loyalists still muttered when I walked by. There were whispers about me being vindictive or overreacting. I didn't care. I didn't need their approval, just their distance. Besides, I had new friends now, residents who finally saw how close they'd come to being swindled. People who used to see the HOA as a shield now saw it for what it had become, a sword wielded by people like Todd for personal gain. One evening, as I was locking up my shed, Cynthia stopped by. She looked tired, but in a satisfied kind of way. "Guess who's pressing charges?" she said with a sly smile. "Let me guess, County DA?" She nodded. Fraud, forgery, misuse of community funds. A dozen charges spread between Todd, Brian, and the fake contractor who'd ghosted halfway through discovery. I couldn't help it. I laughed. "How's the HOA holding up?" "Honestly," she said, "we're rebuilding from scratch. No more rubber stamp meetings. Every decision now gets a community vote. People are angry, but for the right reasons." I raised a bottle. "To angry people." She raised an eyebrow. "To angry people with documents." We clinked bottles. The sun dipped low behind the tree line, and for the first time in months, the air felt quiet again. Not fragile quiet, earned quiet. I wasn't done fighting HOA tyranny, but for now, I could finally exhale. 6 months later, you could barely tell a war had been fought here. The trees I planted were growing in nicely. The walking path was now used by dog walkers and kids on bikes who knew, instinctively, not to cross the line into my woods. The HOA newsletter had a new font, a new tone, and a new editor who didn't begin every paragraph with, "as per regulation." The tone of the neighborhood had shifted. Not overnight, not perfectly, but enough. Cynthia won her election by a landslide. Under her lead, the board implemented an open vote policy, posted all financial transactions publicly, and required third-party oversight for any construction project over $10,000. Gone were the days of handshakes and backroom deals. Every community meeting now included a projector, a Q&A segment, and, shockingly, donuts. Todd, indicted. He took a plea deal, 2 years probation, 100 hours of community service, and full restitution of misused HOA funds. Brian wasn't so lucky. He lawyered up, fought everything, and eventually got hit with felony charges for wire fraud and forgery. The fake contractor was still missing, but the DA had opened an investigation into other HOAs where Clearview had operated. My case had kicked open a door they couldn't shut. People started reaching out to me from across the state, even across the country. I got emails from homeowners fighting their own HOAs, asking for advice, copies of documents, moral support. I helped where I could. I started a blog, not because I thought I was special, but because I knew how easy it was to be steamrolled if no one stood up. One night, I sat on the porch with a whiskey in one hand and my dog asleep at my feet. A storm had just rolled through, and the air smelled like wet cedar and ozone. The old wood of the porch creaked under me, the kind of creak that says, "This house is still standing." It always would. I thought back to how it started, how a neighbor I didn't know walked onto my land and claimed it didn't belong to me, how an entire board of supposedly responsible adults backed him, forged documents, misused power, and nearly got away with it. All to add a few zeros to the value of a land parcel. But in the end, the law held, the truth held, and I held. I didn't burn anything down. I didn't scream or threaten or vandalize. I documented, I resisted, and I pushed back harder with every inch they tried to take. The HOA didn't just lose a road, they lost control. Now, every time someone mentions community guidelines, I smile and ask to see the bylaws. Every time someone talks about what's best for the neighborhood, I ask who decided that and whether a vote was taken. I'm not against rules. I'm against rule by entitlement. So if you're reading this and you think it can't happen to you, that no one's bold enough to redraw your lines, pave over your rights, and tell you to smile while they do it, think again. I've got the shovel they used to break my land. It hangs in my workshop now, right next to the framed copy of the court ruling, and just above it, that squirrel, taxidermied, wearing a tiny HOA badge I had custom made, because justice isn't just a ruling. Sometimes it's a punchline.